Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Disabilities with Laurie Peterson. Laurie spends her days talking about dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and ADHD. She talks to students and adults who have had a lifetime of academic challenges. She's here to share their stories along with other insights with you. So let's talk learning disabilities.
Hello, everybody. This is Laurie. Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Disabilities. Today, we have a very special guest, Andrea Malkin Brenner. She is like the expert on everything about college and the transition from high school to college. Andrea, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Laurie.
So can you just, tell us a little bit about what you do, but also how you landed there? What got you to that place?
Yeah, I've had actually an interesting career path. I'm a sociologist by training. I have a doctorate in sociology, and I was a sociology professor at American University in Washington, D.C. for 20 years.
Wow.
Studying sociology as a first-year student. So I became the obvious choice when AU decided to create a first-year experience course. So I created the course there, and I've worked with other colleges on creating a first-year transition course. I was fortunate enough to write a successful book called How to College that was published by Macmillan Publishers. I wrote it with a colleague, another professor at AU, and it's a student-facing book, really focusing on the transition to college. There's not a lot of transition books that are written by college insiders, and so this was two professors who were really telling it as it is. I speak at colleges and universities across the country, and I am the creator and owner of the Talking College card deck company. They are discussion prompts and insider tips for college-bound students and those helping them on their journey. So I have 5 card decks out now, some for students and their parents, some for students alone, some for colleges to purchase, etc. I'm working on 2 more, and we love getting them in the hands of families of college-bound students, of peer leaders on college campuses, faculty, staff, high schools, etc.
As a college professor, and with all the research you've done and all that you've experienced, what are like the top 3 things you would say are the top 3 biggest differences between being in high school and being in college for that college student?
Sure. Great question. I would say number 1 would be the amount of hours in the college classroom. That takes a lot of students by surprise. So the average high school student in the United States is in class about 35 hours a week. And the average college student is in class 12 to 15 hours a week. The material is, of course, harder and more is expected of that student to work independently, but students are often surprised at how much, quote, free time they have when they get to college. And if the student is not great with time management, that can be a real challenge. So I would say that's probably the big one. Another thing that comes to mind, a lot of students in high school are able to kind of put off things. They might start a homework assignment and say, I don't totally understand what I was assigned, but it's okay. The teacher will discuss it in class tomorrow. That doesn't really happen in the college classroom. College professors have a limited number of hours that they have that student, and they really need that student to come in having completed the reading. They begin their class from that point on. And what happens if a student falls behind is they fall more and more behind. So encouraging students once they enter college to be going to office hours regularly, meeting with graduate TAs, even peers who can maybe help explain a concept. I would say those are probably the 2 biggest real challenges and differences between the academics in high school and college.
So with the kids that you see that make that transition very successfully, seamlessly, what do you think gives them the upper hand?
Well, I think it's a rare student that makes the transition to college seamlessly. So I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Interesting. Okay.
What I love to say to parents is, look, if you have a student who's lagging behind socially, but they've really nailed it academically, or if you have a student who's struggling with executive functioning and time management, but, they can handle the social stuff, no problem. They're both college ready. College faculty and staff don't expect 22-year-old brains. They expect 17 and 18-year-old brains. And an 18-year-old brain is messy. And sometimes an 8-year-old body is messy. Colleges are really ready to welcome students, messy students. And so a student does not have to have it all figured out. It's a time for growth and development for sure. So I would not encourage anyone to think of the process as seamless. I would encourage them to discuss challenges and mistakes that will probably be made well in advance, and rather trying to avoid those mistakes, kind of talk about how the mistakes will be handled. So, all right, my teenager, what will happen if you get your first C on a chemistry quiz? What's your plan of action? Is it to melt down, or is it to call mom, or is it to actually sign up for an office hour or find the chemistry lab, etc.? And so talking through what would you do scenarios, I think, is really important. And that's actually what my card decks are based on, are really brainstorming very, very typical conversations that should happen based on very, very typical challenges of that first year.
What about those families or those students that have sort of that false sense of security, right? Like, I've got a 4.0 in high school, I'm on the dean's list, whatever. I'm in all honors and AP classes. I've had perfect attendance. In theory, right? That sounds like somebody ready for college, but that really doesn't mean you're always ready for college, does it?
No, I think that's a great point, and I would say that it's a little confusing because middle school is sort of like a bigger elementary school, and high school is like a bigger middle school. So it makes sense to think that college is like a bigger high school, but in fact, it's run much more like a business or a professional environment, and that student is going to need to know some skills that they haven't necessarily learned in high school. It's not necessarily the high school's job to teach. So, how to leave a voicemail, how to write a professional email, how to talk to adults, how to take notes not on your phone, how to schedule appointments, anything from a dentist and a haircut to an appointment with a financial aid counselor to, your academic advisor. All of those things are a lot of those things are new to incoming students. And I feel frustrated when students think they should wait till orientation to learn all that. There is a whole summer that can be used after high school graduation, or even if you want to start earlier in, 11th grade would be ideal. But there is still time, even if, families are listening to this at a recent high school graduation. And there's a lot to discuss. Students really need to know the basics of health insurance. What is a copay? What is HIPAA? How to fill their own prescriptions. There's life skills that just because you've received your college acceptance doesn't mean those life skills come in that envelope with that acceptance.
Right. Wouldn't that be great if they did? But they don't.
Right. Yeah.
What kind of advice do you give to parents? Because I know in high school, at least from our point of view, we have a lot of parents who are heavily involved in, did you get that work turned in? Did you look online at the, online classroom? Did you, don't forget to give that note to your teacher? How do you have parents sort of, what kind of advice do you give to them for that, for just weaning off and backing off a little bit?
Yeah, I love to tell families, I encourage them to think of ways that they can step back and their students can step up. So if I'm speaking to an 11th or 12th grade, a parent who is still waking their student up rather than the student waking themselves up with an alarm or packing their lunch or constantly sending reminders or, realize that's not going to happen next year. You're not going to know what's happening on the daily with your kid, and you shouldn't. But instead of, making it so overwhelming to really have to figure it all out. I love to, as you mentioned the word wean, I think it's a really important time, senior year or even the summer before college, to start weaning, pushing your child forward. And also recognizing that if you don't wake them up for their summer job and they don't show up, they might get fired and they might learn from that experience. So I love to tell families, think of safe ways your kids can fail and try to step back. And, this is a summer to let them make all those appointments, that pre-college medical appointment. They're going to have to be calling the health center for their flu shot once they're in college in the fall. So, start early so it's not completely overwhelming.
Do you talk to them at all too about sort of that transition as now that their child's in college, what that communication looks like? Because obviously you don't want to go dark, right? You don't want your child to be completely separate. But what's an appropriate amount of, checking in, I guess?
Right. I get asked that question a lot, and I don't think I would prescribe. Every family is different. Texting can be an absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful connection, and it can also be a disservice. So I would say come up with a plan where you're going to maybe FaceTime or Zoom with your child, at least in the beginning of college, once a week. Doesn't mean you can't talk, between those times. Be flexible, parents, because your student schedule is going to be changing constantly. So, you may say every Sunday night at 9, we're going to Zoom, but know that they may join a club that meets, at the exact time, and then you'll have to shift. I would say a wonderful lesson to teach parents to teach their teens is when you get the call that things aren't so great, I'm unhappy here, I don't have friends, I don't know this is the right place for me, I want to transfer. These are all, comments that a lot of parents hear, and it's heartbreaking. I encourage them to say to their student, when things get better, give me a call, because what ends up happening is the students find the next day, they find a new friend, they've joined a new club, and they forget to circle back to their parents. So that's an important part of communication. I talk to students about it for sure, but I love to tell parents, remind your kid when things aren't going so well. You know what? If things are better tomorrow or the day after, please let me know, because I'm sitting with this just as you are.
And also probably not be super reactionary to that too, like, oh, fine, we're on our way to pick you up kind of thing. Like, let them sort of simmer in it for a little bit.
For sure. And, we as parents are such great fixers.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing it since they were little, and, we're really good at it. We're better than our teens. But this is not a time to be the fixer. This is a time when your child calls. And I will preface it by saying, to me, health and safety emergencies, no matter what, anytime, that is a parent's role. They are there, 4 a.m, call me. But outside of that, and it's something I do with my own kids, is if they call me with a problem, I say, I hear you've got a problem. I want you to think about the solution. Call me when you have a solution. Don't worry if it's perfected. We'll tweak it together. And so really, the more a family can push back and say, well, what do you think you should do? Or, why don't you call me back when you actually have a plan? But knowing that the parent is still there to help them tweak the plan. Students are really terrific out-of-the-box thinkers, but they have to be given the opportunity to think out of the box and problem solve on their own.
Absolutely. So we have a student in our home who is going to be heading off to college in the fall. And next week she goes to orientation, and we're super excited. And I know orientation is fun and exciting. It's incredibly overwhelming, and you learn so much in a very short amount of time. And then really you're focused on, what do I need for my dorm? What do I need? Do I have all the clothes I need? All the sort of secondary things. So what are some of the campus resources you feel like that students should really focus on? They'll learn about probably a lot of these at orientation, but again, they get kind of swept to the side. What are some things you feel like are the most important for kids to know about?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Orientation can be disorienting for a lot of students because it is a parade of campus resources that are coming through. And let's be honest, a student at orientation is worried about making friends and who they're going to eat their next meal with. I mean, they may not be totally tuned in. But that's a great activity that students can do with their parents. Just, this is one of the silver linings of COVID, is that all of this material that was hard to find is now available online. And every college counseling office, every academic support office, learning disability support. It could be, spiritual life. All of those things have an online presence at every university. Even more important, I think, is for students to peruse clubs and organizations before they get to that ginormous, club and organization fair. Especially at a large school, it can be completely overwhelming to students. So if you have a student who knows there are 8 a cappella groups and they want to try out, they know exactly, which table to beeline for. They may have even taken the initiative to reach out to a club leader in advance.
Right.
I'm an incoming student. What days do you practice, or what's required, or whatever it might be? So in terms of campus resources, I would say look early. Don't wait till orientation. And even if you are introduced to things at orientation in the summer, come back home and spend some time. So I would say disability support is absolutely important. All academic support, writing centers, tutoring centers, some are included in your tuition dollars, some are additional fees. But if your student is taking a math class or a stat class or a foreign language class, there's going to be academic support for all of those. They don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
College librarians, I think, are the unsung heroes of the college campus. There's no reason a first-year student should be writing a research paper without the help of a college librarian who's trained to work with that population. I mentioned spiritual life. If a student is interested in spiritual or religious life on campus, getting involved there is a great way to find community. Clubs and organizations for sure. Meeting their RAs is, it's a really important
That's
person.
huge.
Who's been well trained as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask, I haven't been in college in a really, really long time. And so back in the day, obviously the library was where we did everything. But now, do you find that fewer and fewer students are accessing the library because they can get most of what they need online?
I think a smarter student, and I don't mean IQ, I just mean, emotional
Problem solver.
Yeah, will realize a couple of weeks into school where their best study location is. Some students really benefit from studying in their bed or sitting at their desk in their room. Others need to get out of that space where they can, be too much a part of the social world of the dorm and need to go to the library. No, libraries are still booming like they were back then. And they're great places. Actually, many libraries in the last 20 years or so, college libraries, have many more group study rooms, so where you can actually talk. So it's not completely silent. There's usually silent floors, but that's a great place to work with peers on group projects or study groups, things like that. I really think it comes down to how the student studies best, and I find that they don't usually know in the first week. It's going to take a little bit of practice.
No, and I don't think that's a place that they're not as familiar with. While their high schools all have libraries, it's not somewhere that you typically would go to study in high school. So to be able to figure out the best way to use it and know that it's there is a really incredible resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you're helping families, what are some of the tips, as far as, and when do you feel like they should start some of this stuff? Like, what are some things that you should start in your junior year? And then what are some things that are okay to save until the last minute? Or is there anything that's okay to save till the last minute?
Yeah, I mean, look, as long as it happens before the student leaves, the better. To me, earlier is better.
Yeah.
But because I do think a lot of students, especially students with learning challenges who need chunking, they need to learn pieces in smaller chunks. I think the earlier the better. Now, that does not mean that families should be talking about college every night.
No.
And I love to say to a 10th or 11th grade family, pick one night a week. That's the night you're going to talk about college. Regardless of my card decks, or you're using your own resources, or you're just having an open family discussion, or even you're talking about going on college tours or applying to college. If you can do that, let's say a Tuesday night when everybody's home, it really is a nice way to focus where it's just not college on the brain all the time. So that's one piece of advice I like to give. To me, 10th grade spring is ideal to just very early college level skills. So memorize your social security number, learn how to cook some basic things, know how to do your laundry, start making your own dentist appointments, things like that, as early as possible. 11th grade is a great opportunity to really do some academic college building skills. This is an opportunity for students to be working on their professional skills, voicemails, emails, learning how to use resources, learning how to do several drafts of a paper, what are their note-taking skills they need to work on. All of that stuff is ideal in 11th grade.
Yeah.
And then the college building skills, I think we could even save for, the beginning of senior year. But even if there's still things that are being taught at the end, the summer before, it's still better than,
not at all
doing it on their own. And I will say one thing which I feel very strongly about is that parents should not be the only teachers of college building skills. And I encourage a very simple exercise, which is parents and students sitting together. The student builds, maybe set a timer for 10 minutes. The student writes down everything they think they need to learn before they head to college. Simultaneously, the parents on a separate list writing down everything they think their student needs to learn. And And then they can combine and compare those lists and decide who's going to do the teaching. I think it can be overwhelming to a teen if it's the parent always doing the teaching. So is it an older sibling? Is it an aunt or an uncle or a neighbor, a teacher, a mentor, somebody else who can really jump in and maybe work on one particular skill and kind of spread the wealth around?
I like that. I like that. Do you ever talk to families about taking a gap year and when that would be a good time and how that can be important?
Yeah, I do. I don't usually give whole talks on gap years, but I'm often asked about them. I'm a big fan of gap years. There's actually a trend now. More and more students are taking gap years between their junior and senior year of college.
Oh, really?
Actually, my own son just did this last year. I think for some students, a gap year after high school before college is ideal for growth and development, for college ready skills, things like that. But some students want to explore career ideas, and at 18, that's not often available to them and not necessarily where they are developmentally. And so sometimes as students work through the years of college, they get often to, their junior year and things are starting to click. They're finding a major, they're finding new exciting avenues to study, and it's going by so fast. And
Yeah.
so, my own son did that. He ended up moving to Korea and working there, having a wonderful work experience and growth opportunity, and came back really ready for a senior year with a much clearer vision of a career path for himself.
I love that.
It depends on what you want out of the gap year, and
Right.
if it's another year of chronology of growing up, a gap year before freshman year is terrific. But if it's for career exploration, more and more colleges are encouraging and allowing students to do a gap during their 4 years.
Do you get a lot of questions about career or choosing your major, right? I feel like there's so much pressure on our kids these days to pick a major, apply to a specific college within their college. And I feel like that it's causing a lot of stress for a lot of kids. Is that something that you talk about, or what kind of guide do you have for
Yeah,
that?
I do get that question a lot. I agree with you that it causes a lot of stress. It's the rare 17-year-old who knows exactly their career path. And some colleges make it challenging. If you want to be an engineer or you want to be pre-med or pre-vet, you kind of need to know early. And that's pretty overwhelming. I think it's important. Not every student's going to go with an open mind and a liberal arts education and play around. Many are going to go with a plan. And of course, many colleges make you apply, specifically to that school. I just say, go with your gut and then know that you can shift and change. I love to give the analogy of when I talk to high school students that, if you can picture three different types of roads. One is a highway, which is, super fast, career directed. You just know where you're going and there's no way off. And then there's a second image would be kind of a road that's very swervy and curly, which takes sometimes longer. It allows you to look around more, but you're not necessarily as directed. I love to go with the third image, which is to sort of start with a highway, start with a plan, but be willing to take the exits. So
I love that.
You're a psychology major, but you fall in love with a music class. That might become a minor for you. Go explore. It doesn't mean it necessarily has to be what your career is going to be in, but it's also an opportunity for, to expand your brain in some way.
I love that. So if someone is interested in any of your card decks or your book, or in having you speak to their group, either whether that be a school counselor or a group of, parents who are sending their kiddos off to college, what's the best way for folks to find you?
Thank you for asking. My website is talkingcollege.com, and you can find all that information there, my book, my card decks, my talks, etc. talkingcollege.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure that's in the show notes. Thank you for taking some time today to meet with us. This has been awesome. And again, I'm living this right now, so this is very fresh. But it also, I think for those parents of kiddos who are in middle school or just starting high school, it is here before you know it. And so to start thinking about some of this stuff now, not necessarily doing anything, but to just put it in there and be marinating on it. It just makes everything happen a little bit more smoothly and gives you a little bit more confidence in the process. So I really appreciate
My
you
pleasure.
sharing this.
Thank you for having me, Laurie. Congratulations on your own student's graduation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. If you guys have any questions for me or for Andrea, you're welcome to reach out to me at letstalklearningdisabilities@gmail.com. If you have any suggestions on future episodes or something you'd like to hear specifically, please do not hesitate to reach out. I am happy to take your suggestions. I hope everyone has a great day. Andrea, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you guys next time at the next episode.
Thank you so much for joining us today. In our show notes, you can find information about today's talk, as well as links to resources and other episodes. If you have questions about today's talk, have ideas for future episodes, or just want to stay connected, you can contact us through Diagnostic Learning Services on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So, let's keep talking learning disabilities. This podcast is sponsored by eDiagnostic Learning. You can find more information at www.ediagnosticlearning.com.